I still remember the morning when everything felt slightly out of place, as if the world had shifted half an inch while I slept. The air outside my window carried a muted chill, the kind that settles into the wooden frame of the house before sunrise. I stepped out into the quiet street, expecting nothing more than another slow walk toward town. But that was the first time I noticed him. The man watching me from the corner, standing too still, like a pause in the middle of a sentence I hadn't said yet. He wasn't threatening. If anything, he looked lost. His clothes were ordinary, but something about him felt mismatched with the moment. A faint tension in his shoulders, a carefulness in the way he observed the world around him, as if he was remembering it rather than experiencing it. When our eyes met, he didn't smile or look away. He simply nodded as though he had been waiting for me to step outside at that exact second. I tried to ignore him. People passing through our small Washington town wasn't unusual, but when I reached the end of the street, he appeared again, this time across from my friend's house, leaning on the railing as if he belonged there. I never saw him walk. I never even heard his footsteps. He just shifted, occupying spaces he had no right to reach so quickly. He spoke to me only once that morning, and it was enough to unsettle everything I thought I understood about my life. "Choose your words carefully with him today," he murmured, brushing past me as though he knew the conversation waiting inside that house. "It matters more than you think, more than he'll admit, more than you're ready for." His voice was calm, almost tired, like someone rehearsing a memory. I should have ignored him. I should have walked away. But something in his tone stayed with me. The weight of certainty, the strange familiarity, the way he carried my future like a burden he'd already lived through. I didn't know it then, but that morning was the first time a time traveler altered my life, and the last time I mistook manipulation for guidance. Looking back, I can't explain why I didn't question him more that morning. Maybe it was the way he spoke, quiet, steady, almost familiar. Or maybe it was because life in our small Washington town rarely changed, and the slightest ripple felt strangely welcome. I told myself he was just passing through, someone carrying his own troubles, nothing connected to me or to the conversation I was about to have with my closest friend. But even then, something in his eyes unsettled me, a kind of exhausted certainty that didn't belong to someone living in the same present I was. My friend and I had been drifting apart for months. We weren't fighting, not really. We were just slowly becoming strangers in the same orbit. That morning I expected nothing more than another attempt to bridge a distance I didn't fully understand. The traveler's warning, his insistence about my words, should have been nothing more than an odd encounter. Instead, it followed me like a faint echo, settling into the pauses between footsteps, turning a simple walk into something heavier. When I reached the front porch, I hesitated. The traveler was nowhere in sight. The street was empty, quiet in that soft Washington way, with low clouds pressing down on the rooftops. I remember thinking that the moment felt too still, like time holding its breath. I knocked on the door anyway, forcing myself to pretend the day was ordinary. But the feeling wouldn't leave me, that strange sense that my next words had already been spoken somewhere, by someone, in some future I hadn't reached yet. I didn't know then how deeply that warning would cut into both of our lives, or how carefully it had been placed there. I only knew something was off, and I was already too late to stop it. Hi, my name is David. If you're enjoying this story so far, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. Have you ever felt like someone knew what you were about to say before you said it? Thank you for being here with me. Now, let's get back to the story. I didn't walk straight into my friend's house that morning. For a moment, I lingered on the porch, pretending to fix a loose patch on my jacket just to buy myself a few extra seconds. The warning from the time traveler, though I still didn't allow myself to call him that, echoed in the back of my mind like a tune I couldn't shake off. Choose your words carefully with him today. It wasn't even what he said that troubled me the most. It was how he said it. Soft, steady, with the weight of someone who'd already lived through the moment I was about to create. The door opened before I knocked a second time. My friend Mark stepped out of the way with a small, tired smile, one of those expressions that tried to hide something frayed underneath. We grew up 2 blocks apart, spent our summers biking through pine trails, and shared the kind of silence that only childhood friends can sit comfortably inside. But in the past months, we had drifted without ever admitting it. He'd grown quieter, harder to read. There was something on his mind, and I knew it before he even spoke. "Morning," he said, his voice low. "Morning," I replied, suddenly hyper-aware of every word leaving my mouth. Inside, his house felt cooler than usual. His mother had already left for work, and the quietness settled in gently, like dust floating in a narrow beam of light. Mark motioned for me to sit. I didn't. I couldn't. I felt a strange sense that if I sat down, I might fall into the moment too deeply. He walked toward the kitchen, opened the fridge, and grabbed 2 cans of soda, the same brand we'd been drinking since we were 12. He tossed one to me without looking, and I caught it on reflex. When he finally sat, he didn't open his. He just stared at the condensation running down the aluminum, following it with his thumb. "I need to talk to you about something," he said. There it was, the conversation, the one the traveler had anchored my entire morning around. I felt my throat tighten, not with fear, more with the sense that I was standing in the doorway of a choice someone else had built for me. "Okay," I murmured, trying to sound natural. Mark looked up. His eyes were tired, but not from lack of sleep. There was a kind of heaviness in them, the sort that forms when you've been rehearsing what to say for too long. "I think you already know something's been off between us," he said. I almost answered too quickly. "Yes, I know." But the traveler's warning tugged at me, slowing my response as though invisible hands were guiding my tongue. "I've noticed," I finally said. Simple, neutral, non-committal. It wasn't what I truly felt, but it kept the moment from tipping into something too fragile. Mark nodded, like he had expected that answer from me, like I'd just followed a script he'd been imagining. "I'm not good at talking about things," he continued. "You know that. But I've been trying to figure out how to say this without messing things up even more." He paused. My heart beat hard against my ribs, not because of whatever Mark was about to confess, but because a strange, uninvited thought crossed my mind. What if the traveler wanted me to respond in a certain way? What if this moment wasn't meant for me at all, but for him? Mark finally spoke again. "I feel like I've been failing lately, and not just at school or home, with us too. And I don't want to lose what we have. I don't know how to fix anything." His voice cracked softly at the end. Mark wasn't dramatic. He didn't exaggerate. That crack meant something real, something raw. And yet, I hesitated. There was a warmth in me, the instinct to reassure him immediately, to close the gap between us with the truth. But underneath that warmth, there was the cold, precise echo of the stranger's voice. "Choose your words carefully." So I chose the safest path, the one that felt least like me and most like what he'd want me to do. "We're fine," I said gently. "We just drifted a little. It happens." Mark exhaled, relieved, too relieved. And in that small reaction, in the way his shoulders lifted, something clicked in me, an uneasy suspicion that my words mattered in a way I still didn't understand. Because the traveler wasn't warning me to help me. He was warning me to preserve something for him. I just didn't realize it yet. Mark didn't notice that my answer wasn't my own. I could see the relief settle into him, softening the tension in his face, loosening his shoulders. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that things were normal, that we were just two friends trying to mend something fragile. But beneath that comfort was a hollow feeling, the sense that I had stepped into a version of myself that wasn't entirely mine. He took a slow breath, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I'm glad you said that," he murmured. "I was worried you were done with this, with us." I shook my head because it was the only truth I could still hold on to. "I'm not." His eyes softened. He believed me, too quickly maybe, and that belief landed strangely inside me, like it belonged to a moment that had happened before, in someone else's memory. He sat back against the couch and finally opened his soda, the hiss of carbonation cutting through the quiet room. The sound felt almost too loud for the soft, gray morning filtering through the windows. I opened mine just to have something to do with my hands, but I didn't drink it. My thoughts were drifting again, to the corner of the street, to the stranger who had spoken as if he already knew everything Mark and I were about to say. Guide your next words, not warn, not help, guide. The word rolled through me with a strange, metallic taste. "Do you ever feel like you're changing without noticing?" Mark asked suddenly. I looked up. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, staring down at the soda can spinning slowly between his palms. "I don't know. Like, you're waking up a little different each morning. Not in a big way, just shifted. like something small is happening behind you while you're walking forward. His words struck deeper than he realized. The traveler had spoken to me with that same sense of inevitability, as if small moments had already rearranged themselves without my permission. It was unsettling hearing something similar come from Mark, a reflection of a truth he shouldn't have been close to. I guess everyone changes, I said carefully. Sometimes we just don't see it happening. He nodded, but he didn't look convinced. His gaze drifted toward the window as if he expected someone to be standing outside. For a heartbeat, I wondered if he felt the traveler's presence too, or if some faint trace of that encounter had brushed against him through me. I followed his gaze, half expecting to see that same still figure at the edge of the street, but the sidewalk was empty. Only the quiet sway of the fir trees and the faint hum of an old truck passing somewhere blocks away. "You okay?" I asked. Mark hesitated before answering. "Yeah, just tired." I wanted to ask tired from what, but the question felt too heavy for the moment. Instead, I took a seat across from him, resting the soda can on the coffee table between us. The traveler's words still rested on my shoulders like a weight I couldn't shake, pressing into the spaces between my thoughts. "Look," Mark began, his voice softer. "I didn't call you here to make things weird. I just needed to know we were still good." "We are," I said. The words left my mouth before I could stop them, quick, like they'd been waiting behind my teeth. And again, that small shift in Mark's expression, that subtle lift in his eyebrows, struck something inside me. He needed to hear that sentence, or someone needed him to. I didn't know which answer unsettled me more. Mark leaned back, letting out a shaky breath. "Thanks," he whispered. "I've been carrying a lot, and I didn't want to push you away." "You didn't," I replied, though even as I said it, I wondered if it was true. The room settled into a quiet silence, the kind that used to be comfortable between us but now felt measured, timed, almost orchestrated. I kept replaying the traveler's voice in my mind, the cadence of it, the certainty, the way it pressed against my own instincts and replaced them with something cleaner, safer. He was using me. I didn't know how, not yet, but the thought clung to me like cold air. Mark stood and stretched, trying to shake off whatever heaviness had gathered in him. "You want to head out for a bit? Clear our heads?" Part of me wanted to say yes, but a strange dread pulled at my chest, the kind that warned me I was already walking a path someone else had paved. "Maybe in a minute," I said. "Let's just sit for a second." Mark nodded and sat back down, and in that brief, quiet pause, I realized something unsettling. Nothing about this moment felt fully ours. The silence between us stretched longer than it should have. Not empty, just heavy, like the air carried something neither of us had the courage to speak yet. Mark leaned back on the couch, legs stretched out, eyes fixed somewhere on the ceiling as if the answers he needed were written there. I watched him quietly, trying to memorize the details of that moment, the stillness of it, because some part of me sensed that whatever lay ahead would make everything feel different. He finally broke the silence with a soft exhale. "You remember that trail near Willow Creek?" he asked, voice distant. I nodded. "Yeah, we used to race our bikes down there. You always won," he said with a small smile, the kind that flickered and then vanished. "I used to think if I could beat you just once, things would, I don't know, shift, like it would mean something." I raised an eyebrow. "It's just a trail." "No," he murmured. "It wasn't. Not to me." There was a strange honesty in his tone, tender, worn, and threaded with a fear he didn't name. I wasn't used to seeing him like this. Mark had always been the steady one, the one who didn't flinch when life tugged at the edges. But now he looked like someone standing at the edge of a confession he wasn't ready to give. "Mark," I began carefully, "what's really going on?" He hesitated, the kind of hesitation that seemed to stretch seconds into minutes. His fingers tapped lightly on the soda can, creating a soft metallic rhythm that filled the room with a fragile pulse. "I've been feeling strange," he finally said. "Not sick, just out of step, like I'm not fully syncing with everyone else, like I'm walking half a second behind my own life." His words sent a ripple through me. Those were the kinds of sentences a time traveler would say, or someone affected by one. But Mark shouldn't have known anything about that. "What do you mean?" I asked. He shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. I'll say something, and then it feels like I already said it yesterday. Or I'll think about doing something and 10 minutes later I can't remember if I actually did it or just imagined it. I keep losing small moments. I felt my chest tighten. How long has this been happening? I asked quietly. A while, he admitted. I didn't want to sound crazy. I swallowed hard. Maybe he wasn't crazy. Maybe he wasn't even wrong. Maybe he was entangled in something I had unknowingly triggered, or something the traveler was trying to preserve. The thought made me colder than the morning air outside. Mark looked down at his hands. And when you walked in today, I felt something settle, like something caught up to where it was supposed to be. A chill crawled down my spine. What do you mean by that? I whispered. He shook his head, frustrated. I don't know how to explain it. It's like you being here put something back into place, like a missing part. My pulse quickened. That was too close to what the traveler had implied, that my words mattered, that my presence mattered, that the conversation itself mattered. But for whom? Me? Mark? Or the traveler? Mark, I said slowly. Has anything strange happened to you recently? Anything unusual? Even small things? He frowned. Like what? Like someone stopping you, asking you something, or watching you. He stared at me for a long moment, searching my expression. Then he shook his head. No, nothing like that. But his voice wavered, just enough for me to notice, just enough for me to doubt. Maybe he didn't remember. Maybe he wasn't meant to. Maybe the traveler had been guiding more than just my steps. The thought hit me in a way I didn't expect, a quiet, creeping fear, not of the traveler, but of the possibility that Mark was already caught in something reshaped, edited, overwritten. He leaned forward suddenly. Hey, he said softly. Are you okay? You look distant. I opened my mouth to answer, but the words wouldn't come. For the first time that morning, I wasn't thinking about what the traveler wanted me to say. I was thinking about the cost of saying nothing. I'm fine, I managed. Just tired. He nodded, accepting the lie. And as he sat back again, I realized something that made the room feel even smaller. Whatever the traveler wanted from me, it wasn't finished yet. And whatever he wanted from Mark had already begun. I didn't stay long after that. Mark insisted he was fine, and I pretended to believe him, though every word he spoke carried a faint distortion, like listening to someone underwater. The more he tried to reassure me, the more I felt an invisible hand tightening around the morning. When I stepped outside, the air felt colder than before, sharp, almost metallic, the kind of cold that grips the skin without warning. The street was empty, too empty. Our neighborhood wasn't busy, but it wasn't still like this either. No kids riding bikes, no dogs barking, no cars rolling down the distant hill. Just the stretch of asphalt framed by rows of pines that swayed gently as if whispering to one another. For a moment I stood there listening, waiting for the usual sounds to return. They didn't. I shoved my hands into my jacket pockets and began walking. The traveler hadn't reappeared, but his absence felt deliberate, like he'd stepped out of the scene now that his influence had settled exactly where he wanted it. A strange heaviness followed me down the sidewalk, a sense that something had shifted inside the house behind me, something I had been part of without fully understanding. Halfway down the road, I stopped. Someone had been here, recently. There was a single footprint in the thin layer of moisture on the pavement, crisp, facing the opposite direction from my walk, as if someone had been standing behind me moments earlier, watching. The print didn't match any shoe I recognized, certainly not Mark's. The pattern was sharp, intricate, like something from a design decades ahead of where we stood. And oddly, impossibly, it wasn't fading. The morning moisture should have softened it within seconds. But it remained as distinct as if it had been stamped there intentionally. I crouched, staring at it, feeling a prickling along the back of my neck. Had he been this close? The traveler? Waiting for me to step out? Or waiting for something to settle inside Mark before he moved on? The thought made my stomach twist. I stood quickly and kept walking. The further I got from Mark's house, the more the world seemed to wake up again. A distant engine buzzed down the street. A dog barked behind a fence. A branch snapped somewhere in the woods. The puzzle pieces of normal life fell back into place the moment I left that porch behind, and that only made everything feel more orchestrated. At the end of the block, I slowed my pace. The morning clouds hung low and heavy, pressing the sky into a flat, muted gray. It felt like a day suspended between moments, 1 foot in the ordinary, the other somewhere else entirely. I couldn't stop replaying Mark's words. Out of step, losing small moments. Those weren't the kinds of things you just stumbled into. They were the kinds of things caused by interference, by someone who understood time not as a straight line, but as something that could be nudged, sculpted, redirected. And if a single conversation could tether Mark back to the right version of himself, what had he been slipping toward before? By the time I reached the corner store, my pulse had settled into a slow, uneasy rhythm. I pulled open the door, letting the warm smell of paper, old shelves, and faint coffee envelop me. Mrs. Stewart, the owner, stood behind the counter, sorting through receipts. She looked up, smiled faintly, and then paused. Her eyes squinted just slightly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "Morning, David?" she said, though it sounded like she was testing the name, searching for something familiar that didn't quite land. "You okay?" I asked. "Oh, yes, of course." She waved her hand, forcing a smile. "It's just been a strange morning." My chest tightened. Strange how? She hesitated, choosing her words. "I opened the shop at 6, like always. But when I turned the sign around, it was already turned. And the register," she tapped the wooden counter. "It was open. Not empty, not wrong, just open. Maybe you forgot to close it last night," I suggested. Mrs. Stewart shook her head. "No, I remember closing it. Clear as day." The strange thing wasn't the register. It was her tone, soft, unsettled, like someone trying to grasp a memory that kept sliding an inch out of reach. The same way Mark sounded, the same way I felt. Something was bleeding through the timeline. Something subtle but everywhere. I bought a pack of gum just to avoid standing there empty-handed. When she handed me the change, her fingertips brushed my palm for a second. She froze. "You're cold," she whispered. "Colder than the morning." I hadn't noticed, but when I stepped outside again, I realized she was right. The chill wasn't from the weather. It was from him, the traveler. Close, even when unseen. Guiding, watching, waiting. And for the first time I wondered, if he could change my future with a whisper, what had he already changed without a word? I didn't walk home. I wandered, taking turns I normally ignored, cutting across quiet yards and long sidewalks that seemed to stretch further than usual. I wasn't avoiding home, not exactly. It was more that I didn't trust myself to sit in my room and pretend the day was just another Wednesday in 1987. Something was happening around me, subtle as a breath, quiet as dust settling on a shelf. But I could feel it now, feel the way small things trembled around the edges of reality. The traveler's voice kept replaying in my mind. Guide your next words, not warn, not protect, guide. The difference felt colder the longer I walked. It meant he didn't care what the conversation meant for me or Mark. He only cared about the outcome, and outcomes never belonged to the people living inside them. A soft wind rustled the fir trees lining the street, pushing their scent toward me. Earthy, sharp, familiar. I'd walked this neighborhood for years, but something about it felt slightly misaligned. Not wrong, just shifted, as if someone had gently rearranged the world while my back was turned. I was halfway down Maple Ridge Road when I saw someone standing at the bus stop. A woman in a denim jacket, hair tied back, holding a folded newspaper she wasn't reading. I didn't recognize her, which wasn't unusual. People passed through our town all the time. But something about her posture caught my attention. She wasn't facing the road. She was facing me, and she was watching me with the kind of stillness the traveler had. I slowed my pace without meaning to. She didn't move. Her expression wasn't threatening, just observant. Too observant. Like she was cataloging every second of my walk. I didn't want to stop, but curiosity tugged at me, subtle and insistent. "You need something?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Her eyes flicked upward at the sound of my voice. She seemed surprised, not by the question but by the fact that I was speaking at all, as if she expected me to walk past without noticing her. "No," she said softly. "Just waiting." "For the bus?" Her hesitation was almost imperceptible. "Something like that." The wind shifted again, carrying the faint scent of rain. I shoved my hands into my pockets, suddenly aware of how cold my fingertips were. "You from around here?" I asked. This time she smiled. A quiet, knowing smile. Not exactly. Not a denial. Not a lie. Something else. Something evasive. I glanced at the sky. at the distant clouds forming a solid gray sheet. This conversation felt like standing on thin ice, aware with every passing second that something beneath me was moving. "Well," I said, nodding awkwardly. "Have a good morning." "I hope you do too," she replied. "It's an important one." Every muscle in me tensed. Those were the traveler's words. Not exactly the same, but close enough to feel borrowed, like she had pulled them from the same memory he had pulled mine. Before I could respond, a truck passed between us, rattling loudly down the street. When it cleared, the woman was gone. No footsteps, no fading silhouette, no sign of someone walking away. Just the stillness of the bus stop and the faint echo of her words. A hollow feeling spread through my chest. Two people now, both speaking like they'd skimmed ahead of time's pages. Only one had spoken to me directly, and the other had watched me as if checking whether something had happened the way it should. I turned back toward home, walking faster this time. My breath fogged in the air even though the temperature hadn't dropped. A thin layer of unease settled on my skin, heavier with each step. By the time I reached my street, the world had regained its familiar rhythm. Cars in driveways, curtains shifting in windows, a neighbor sweeping leaves into a neat pile. But the normalcy didn't soothe me. It made the earlier moments feel even more out of place, as if I had stepped into a pocket of time that wasn't meant to exist. When I reached my house, I paused at the front gate. Someone had left a mark on the wooden post, a thin, diagonal scratch, clean and deliberate. I ran my thumb along it. Fresh. Too fresh. A sign, a signal, or simply a breadcrumb left by someone who traveled through time the way others walked through streets. Either way, I knew one thing with unsettling clarity. Whatever game the traveler was playing, it involved more people than I realized, and I was only beginning to see the edges of it. I stood at the gate longer than I should have, running my thumb over that thin, diagonal scratch. It wasn't deep, but it was too precise to be accidental. It felt intentional, like a quiet signal left for someone who knew where to look. For me, for the traveler, or for someone else walking along another version of this same street. A faint uneasiness pressed against my ribs. I finally forced myself through the gate, the hinges letting out a soft groan that sounded louder than usual in the still morning. When I reached the porch, I hesitated again. I don't know why. It was just my house. The same peeling paint on the railing, the same mat with the worn-out corners. But something about it felt watched, not in a threatening way. More like a photograph someone else had taken of my life, and I was stepping back into the frame. The moment I stepped inside, warmth hit me, though I didn't remember leaving the heater on. The house was quiet, too quiet. Even the refrigerator's usual hum seemed muted, like sound itself was holding back. I set my keys on the kitchen counter and listened, half expecting a floorboard to creak upstairs, or the faint buzz of the neighbor's lawnmower through the wall. Nothing. It felt like the whole house was waiting for me to notice something. I walked into the living room and stopped. My school folder, normally in my bag, was lying open on the coffee table. Papers were spread out, but neatly, almost respectfully, as if someone had gone through them carefully. Not rifled, not searched, just examined. The edges of the pages weren't bent. The pencils beside them hadn't been moved far. Whoever did this wasn't in a hurry. I knelt beside the table and ran my fingers over one of the sheets. It was a simple math assignment, nothing unusual. But at the bottom corner, someone had drawn a tiny circle, sharp, thin, almost invisible. I hadn't done that. My stomach dropped. I turned the next page, another tiny circle, and the next. Always the same size, same placement, same faint, perfect outline, like a stamp from a different time, left by someone who didn't belong in any classroom I'd ever sat in. Before I could make sense of it, the phone rang. The sudden sound sliced through the quiet house like a blade. I jolted, my heart hammering in my chest, and for a second I considered not answering. But the ringing continued, steady, rhythmic, each chime echoing off the walls in a way that made the house feel smaller with every second. I picked up the receiver. Hello? Silence. Not static, not a click, just silence. I waited, listening for a breath, a shift, anything. Then a voice, quiet, calm, familiar. You did well this morning. My hand froze around the receiver. The traveler. It had to be him. My throat tightened. What do you want? The words came out sharper than I expected. A soft exhale, almost like a tired smile. Only what I've always wanted. That doesn't mean anything, I said. You talked to me. You approached me. You told me how to speak to my friend. Why? Another pause. Not hesitation, calculation. Some things need to stay aligned, he said. You helped ensure that. Aligned with what? I demanded. With where you're meant to be, he answered. With where he's meant to be. The pronoun hit harder than I expected. He, Mark. My grip tightened around the receiver. You're using him. Incorrect, the traveler said gently. I'm using you. A cold wave rolled through me. He continued before I could speak, but only because you were willing to listen. Many aren't. I swallowed the rising anger. You didn't give me a choice. There are always choices, he murmured, but some are easier when repeated. Repeated? I whispered. He didn't answer that. Instead, he shifted, his tone softening even further. You're safer when things unfold the way they did before. Before. My pulse stumbled. Before what? The line clicked. Silence. I stayed there, the receiver cold against my ear, listening to nothing. My breath shook once, then again. Slowly, I set the phone down. The room felt heavier, the air thicker. I looked back at the open folder, at the tiny circles marking each page like quiet imprints of his presence. Repeated. Aligned. Before. Words that didn't belong to this moment, or maybe they did, just not in the order I was living them. Something told me this wasn't the first time he had guided my morning. It was just the first time I remembered. I didn't move for a long time after the call ended. I stood there in the quiet living room, my hand resting on the phone as if it might ring again, as if I needed confirmation that the voice I heard wasn't some trick of stress or imagination. But the silence that followed was too deep, too patient, as if the house itself were listening alongside me. I finally stepped back, letting the receiver settle into its cradle. The small click felt final in a way that made my skin tighten. I didn't realize I was trembling until I rubbed my palms against my jeans and felt the faint shake in my fingers. The traveler's words echoed through me, calm, certain, unbothered. You did well. You were willing to listen. Things unfold the way they did before. Before. The word spun inside my mind like a loose thread waiting to be pulled. I walked toward the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to see the street. Everything looked normal again. Neighbors walking dogs, a couple chatting beside a mailbox, someone carrying groceries across their yard. The world moved forward as if nothing beneath its surface had shifted, as if time were solid and unbroken. But I could feel the fracture now. It was subtle, like stepping onto a wooden floor and sensing the one board that dips under your weight. I couldn't name it, but I could feel it, and that terrified me more than anything the traveler had said. I left the window and made my way upstairs. My room felt untouched. Bed slightly messy, posters curling at the edges, old trophies collecting dust. But even here, something was off. A faint scent of cold air clung to the space, like someone had been standing in the middle of the room minutes before I entered. I checked my desk. My notebooks were lined up perfectly, more neatly than I ever kept them. My pens were arranged in a straight line. My lamp angle had changed, pointing directly at my chair. Someone had been here. Someone who didn't leave footprints. Someone careful enough to rearrange my life by millimeters. I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to calm the rapid beat of my heart. I needed to think, to understand, to connect something, anything that would anchor me to sense. But every thought I formed slipped away, as if the act of thinking itself had become unstable. A soft knock startled me. I jumped to my feet, pulse hammering as I turned toward the doorway. The knock came again, slow, gentle, almost apologetic. I stepped carefully down the stairs and opened the door a crack. Mark stood on the porch. His expression was unreadable at first, but there was a heaviness in the set of his shoulders, a strange tautness in his jaw. His eyes met mine with something that wasn't fear, but wasn't comfort either. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I stepped aside, letting him in. He didn't sit this time. He stood in the middle of the living room, looking around as if checking for signs he couldn't explain. When his gaze landed on the open folder on the coffee table, his eyebrows pulled together. "You were studying?" he asked. "No," I said. "I didn't leave those out." He looked at me, searching my face. "Then who did?" "I don't know." He didn't press. but his eyes stayed on me longer than usual, as if trying to read something behind my expression. I motioned for him to sit, and this time he did, slowly, hesitantly. After a moment, he rubbed his hands together, leaning forward. I left my house and something felt wrong. I don't know how to explain it. Like I walked out of a moment that didn't match the one I woke up in. Out of step? I asked softly. The same phrase he had used earlier. He nodded, swallowing. Yeah, worse actually. I sat across from him, the traveler's voice threading quietly through the air between us like smoke. What happened? I asked. He exhaled shakily. It's going to sound strange. Mark, everything sounds strange today. He gave me a hollow smile at that. Then he looked down at his hands. I was in my room, trying to distract myself, and then I picked up this old photo, one of us from middle school, and I swear I remembered another version of it. I felt the temperature in the room slip downward. Another version how? I whispered. There were differences, small ones. You were wearing a different jacket. The angle was slightly off, but I could see both versions in my head like they were overlapping. A tremor moved through me. He wasn't supposed to remember things like that, not unless something around him was changing, not unless someone was nudging the timeline into alignment, and Mark was accidentally catching the seams. And then, he continued, voice thin, I blinked, and the other version was gone, completely gone, like it never existed. He looked up at me, eyes wide, fear now finally surfacing. David, what's happening to us? I didn't answer, because deep down, I knew this wasn't happening to us. It was happening through us, or maybe because of us, because of whatever the traveler was trying to preserve. And in that moment, with Mark's voice shaking across the room and the faint circle markings still waiting on my homework pages, one truth settled over me like cold fog. We weren't just part of a moment being aligned. We were part of a moment being rewritten. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The room felt too small for what Mark had just told me. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock in the kitchen, each second falling like a quiet reminder that time was still moving, whether or not it was moving in the right direction. I leaned back slowly, trying to steady my thoughts. Mark, when did this start? The things being different, the memories overlapping? He rubbed his palms against his jeans, eyes fixed on the floor. A few weeks ago, but it wasn't like this at first. It was little things. A song on the radio I thought I'd heard a different way. A conversation that felt familiar before it happened. I kept telling myself it was stress or that I was misremembering. And today? I asked. He looked up and the fear in his eyes was no longer subtle. Today felt like a door opening, like something was waiting on the other side. A cold shiver slid down my spine. I knew that feeling. The traveler had carried it, an awareness of moments unfolding like pages he had already read. But the idea that Mark was brushing against that same awareness, that was different. That was dangerous. You said it felt worse this morning, I murmured. Why? What changed? Mark hesitated, his fingers tightening around each other. When you left my house, I tried to distract myself. I went to get water. But when I walked into the kitchen, the sun wasn't in the same place. I blinked. What do you mean? He swallowed hard. The light came from the wrong angle. It looked like the afternoon sun, not morning, but only for a moment, like a flash. And then, he snapped his fingers softly. Gone. Back to normal. My chest tightened. And you're sure? I asked. Yes. His voice trembled. I've lived in that house my whole life. I know how the morning looks. I know where the shadows fall. It was wrong. The silence that followed was suffocating. I sat there trying to form words, but the fear that had been sitting quietly at the base of my spine finally stood up inside me. If Mark was experiencing time misalignment, flickers, overlaps, inconsistent versions of reality, then he wasn't just near the traveler's influence. He was becoming affected by it, and I didn't know what that meant. David, Mark whispered, has anything strange happened to you today? I looked at him, really looked at him. His face was pale, his breathing uneven. He wasn't asking out of curiosity. He was asking because he already suspected the answer. I considered lying, telling him that I was fine, that the morning had just been long, that the only strange thing was the traveler's warning. But the weight of the phone call, the rearranged objects in my room, the mysterious circles on my homework pages, It all pressed against my ribs with a truth I could no longer ignore. Yeah, I finally admitted. Something happened. He swallowed. Something like what happened to me? Yes, I said quietly. Not the same, but close enough. His eyes flickered. Fear, relief, confusion all tangled together. So, we're both losing time? No, I said instantly, surprising both of us. We're not losing it. Someone else is bending it. The words felt wrong and right at the same time, like speaking them made the air shift around us. Mark leaned forward. Who? I hesitated. The traveler's voice, calm and precise, echoed in my mind. Things unfold the way they did before. I didn't want to pull Mark into this, but he was already deep inside the cracks, already seeing wrong shadows, already remembering rewritten photographs. He deserved something closer to the truth. There's someone, I said softly. A man. He stopped me this morning. Mark's face paled further. Stopped you. He knew details about my day. I continued. Things he shouldn't. He told me how to talk to you. He said my words mattered. Mark's breath caught. And you listened? I didn't mean to, I whispered. It was like I was nudged, like he already knew how I'd respond. Mark pressed a hand against his forehead. David. Who is he? I shook my head slowly. I don't know, but he talks like he's been here before. Mark froze. His eyes widened in a way I'd never seen. David, he whispered, voice trembling. I think he's the one making me forget things. The words hit me like a blow to the chest, because deep down, I had begun to fear exactly that the traveler wasn't just manipulating me. He was editing the space between us, not erasing memories, not changing history, but nudging the present just enough to shape the moment he needed. I leaned forward, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark, has he ever talked to you? Has he ever stood near you? Mark closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they glistened with something cold and fragile. I don't remember, he whispered. That's how I know he has. I didn't know what to say after Mark's confession. The room felt unbearably still, as if the air itself paused to hear what would come next. His words, I don't remember. That's how I know he has, echoed inside me with a weight too heavy for someone our age to carry. Memories shouldn't bend like that. People shouldn't feel the presence of someone they couldn't recall. But Mark wasn't imagining things. I knew that now, because the traveler had already done the same to me, guiding one moment, rearranging another, leaving traces that felt like fingerprints on the underside of time. I swallowed hard. Mark, when you say you don't remember, do you mean the memory is missing? Or that it feels covered? He hesitated. His eyes moved around the room, searching for words that didn't yet exist. Covered, he finally said, like something pressed against a window. I can't see what's on the other side, but I know something is there. I can feel the shape of it. A quiet dread slid through me. That was exactly how the traveler operated. Never loud, never forceful, just precise, gentle in the most unsettling way imaginable. If he wanted to hide a moment, he didn't erase it. He dimmed it, shifted it, pushed it half an inch to the left so your memory couldn't quite catch its outline. I sat forward, elbows on my knees. Mark, you need to be honest with me. Has anything else felt wrong? Anything at all? He exhaled shakily, rubbing his palms together again. It's not just the photo, or the sun. It's me. I feel like I'm being pulled toward something I can't see. Like a tide. A tide? He nodded. I keep having this strange sensation. I'll be in the middle of something and suddenly I'll feel like I'm standing where I'm supposed to stand, even if I didn't intend to be there. His voice cracked slightly, like I'm falling into place. I didn't breathe for a second. Falling into place. Aligned, repeated, before. The traveler's vocabulary. My pulse hammered painfully in my ears. Mark, did you have any strange dreams recently? Or flashes of déjà vu that felt too strong? He closed his eyes, his brow tightening. Yeah, last night. I had a dream of the two of us sitting on the porch behind my house. The light was different, soft, faded, like a late afternoon from years ago. He opened his eyes again. But the strange part isn't the dream. It's that when I woke up, I thought it already happened, like it's a memory. My breath caught. Did it? No. He shook his head firmly. At least, I don't think it did. He looked down at his hands again, his voice trembling slightly. "David, what if I'm remembering wrong versions of things? What if the traveler is changing something and I'm catching the leftovers?" The words hit me harder than I expected. I had thought the traveler was using me to reach Mark. But what if Mark was already entangled in something far deeper? Something the traveler couldn't fully hide anymore. "Mark," I said gently, I think he's trying to keep something the same. Something between us, or something about you." "Why me?" he asked softly. I didn't know. I had theories, fears, quiet guesses that sat heavy on my tongue, but nothing solid, nothing safe to say. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but he's not here for no reason." "He's using you," Mark murmured. "But what is he doing to me?" Before I could answer, a faint sound drifted from outside, soft, irregular, like footsteps on gravel. Mark stiffened, his eyes darting to the window. I felt it too, a sudden pressure in the air, as if someone had stepped across a threshold that belonged to both of us. I stood slowly and walked toward the window, careful not to shift the curtain too much. Through the thin gap, I saw nothing unusual. The street was empty. The trees swayed normally. But the feeling, cold and quiet, lingered like the echo of a presence. Mark joined me, standing close enough that I could hear his unsteady breathing. "Do you see anything?" he whispered. "No, but you feel it," he said. I nodded. He swallowed. "David, if he's been near me, why don't I remember him the way you do?" I turned to face him. "Because maybe he didn't want you to," I said softly. "Maybe you remembering him changes something he needs to happen." Mark closed his eyes, a tear forming at the corner but never falling. "I don't want to be part of this." "Neither do I whispered. But the truth was unavoidable. We already were, deeply, dangerously, and whatever the traveler wanted, we were moving closer to it with every breath. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the house felt like it shifted a fraction of an inch, like the walls were expanding and contracting in a slow, silent breath I couldn't hear but somehow sensed. Shadows stretched too far across the floor. The ticking of the clock didn't match the rise and fall of my heartbeat. And every so often, I caught myself staring at a corner or a doorway as if someone had just stepped out of sight. It wasn't fear of the traveler that kept me awake. It was the fear that he had already moved beyond simple influence, that he was adjusting the world around us the same way someone adjusts a photograph, refining small details until the image matches the memory they're trying to preserve. By morning, I felt hollow. The early light filtered through the curtains in dull streaks, gray and muted, as if it had traveled a long distance to reach me. I dressed without thinking, my hands moving slowly, almost mechanically. Downstairs the house was quiet again, not peacefully quiet, but watchful, like it was waiting for something to happen. I stepped outside, hoping the air would clear my head. Instead, the cold bit deeper than usual, sinking past my skin and settling into the bone. The sky was thick with low clouds, stretching heavy across Washington's hills, the kind of sky that made the day feel suspended. Halfway down my street, I saw Mark. He stood at the intersection, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, shoulders hunched. He didn't wave. He didn't even look up right away. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes found mine instantly, like he had been sensing me approach long before he heard my footsteps. "You came," he said quietly when I reached him. "Of course I did." He gave a small, tired nod. "I didn't want to be alone this morning." We started walking without deciding on a direction. Our shoes crunched over the damp pavement, and for a minute the silence between us felt almost normal again. Almost. Because everything inside me was coiled tight, waiting for the next subtle shift. "I had another dream," Mark said suddenly. I turned my head. "Last night?" "Yeah, but it wasn't really a dream." His voice lowered. It felt like a memory, one I wasn't supposed to see. My stomach tightened. "What was it?" He hesitated. "We were older, not much, but older. Maybe a few years. We were sitting on a bench near the creek. You said something, I can't remember what, but I felt peaceful, like things between us had settled, like the distance was gone. That doesn't sound like something you shouldn't see," I said gently. "That's not the part I'm scared of," he replied. I waited. I was wearing the same clothes I wore yesterday. Exactly the same, down to the crease in the sleeve. He swallowed. And the sky? It looked like yesterday's sky, too. The same light. The same clouds. I stopped walking. "Mark, are you saying your memory looked like..." A repeat? He gave a hollow nod. A loop, like a moment running twice. Something cold moved down my spine. And when I woke up, he continued, I had this feeling like I'd lived the same day more than once. Not the whole day, just pieces of it. Little fragments repeating themselves. My pulse quickened. Mark, that's not just memory interference. That's temporal bleed-through. He let out a shaky breath. I was afraid you'd say that. I looked around us, suddenly too aware of how still the street seemed. Has anything else happened this morning? He hesitated again, long enough that it made my chest tighten. When I left my house, he said softly, I saw someone standing across the road. Just a shape. I couldn't make out their face, but they were watching me. When I blinked, they were gone. The traveler, or someone aligned with him, or something worse, someone affected by what the traveler had changed. Did they speak? I asked. No, but... He paused, swallowing hard. It felt like they were waiting for me to do something, or remembering something I hadn't done yet. We began walking again, slower this time. The wind pushed against us, carrying a faint chill that felt almost familiar, like the air held traces of someone else's breath. David, Mark said, voice trembling just enough for me to hear it. What if I'm not remembering the wrong version of things? What if I'm remembering the right version, and this is the wrong one? I stared at him, because for the first time I realized he might not be wrong. For the first time I realized the traveler wasn't just guiding events. He might be rewriting the present around us, adjusting Mark, adjusting me, until the timeline lined up perfectly with the moment he needed to reach. And if Mark could feel the seams, that meant the seams were beginning to tear. We walked in silence for a while, our steps echoing faintly against the quiet neighborhood. The world around us looked normal enough. Houses lined up neatly, mailboxes tilted at familiar angles, the distant hum of a car engine somewhere up the hill. But none of it felt grounded. It was as if the morning had slipped loose from the days before it, floating half a second ahead or behind where it belonged. Mark shoved his hands deeper into his pockets. Do you think he's watching us right now? He asked, not looking at me. I didn't answer immediately. The truth was, I had felt the traveler's presence since dawn. Soft, distant, but unmistakably there, like a shadow at the edge of the frame. It wasn't fear that followed us. It was intention. I think he's close, I finally said, but not watching. Waiting. For what? Mark whispered. I didn't know, and whatever guesses I had, I wasn't ready to voice them. We turned down Willow Creek Road, the place where we used to race our bikes until our legs burned. The narrow path snaked through the trees, damp with last night's mist. The air smelled of pine and cold soil. It should have felt nostalgic, comforting even. Instead, the forest felt a degree too still, as if nature itself had leaned closer to listen. Halfway down the path, Mark slowed. Did you see that? He asked under his breath. See what? He pointed ahead. At first I didn't notice it, but then, barely visible through the trees, I caught a faint shimmer in the air, a distortion, subtle and trembling, like heat rising off asphalt on a summer day. But it wasn't hot. The morning was cold, my breath a thin cloud in front of me. Mark stepped closer, his voice cracking. It's the same thing I saw yesterday, at the corner near my house. I grabbed his arm. Don't go near it. He stiffened, swallowing hard. Why? What is it? A seam, I whispered. Or a flaw. Something left behind when the timeline is adjusted. I didn't know if that was true, but the moment I said it, I felt it settle into me with an awful certainty. Mark stared at the distortion, his expression torn between fear and curiosity. It feels like it's pulling. Don't let it. He took a step back, then another. The shimmer dimmed, then dissipated as if it had never been there. He exhaled sharply. David, what if that thing is connected to the memories I'm losing? I shook my head. You're not losing them. You're remembering the wrong version, or the previous version. Which one is worse? He asked. Neither of us answered. We kept walking until the trees opened up, revealing the small clearing where we used to rest after biking. The old wooden bench was still there, cracked along the edges, leaning slightly to one side, but something about it was off. I couldn't explain it, but the light fell on it differently, as if the sun couldn't decide which angle it was supposed to hit. Mark noticed it too. That's it, he whispered. That's exactly what I saw in my dream. This place, that bench, you sitting on it. My breath caught. Did I say anything in the dream? He shook his head. I woke up too soon. We approached the bench slowly. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, each step drawing out the tension in a thin line that stretched behind us. When we reached it, I sat down without thinking. Mark froze. "This is exactly it," he said. "The way you're sitting right now, the angle of your shoulders, everything." A cold ripple ran through me. "Mark, did it feel like a memory or a warning?" He didn't answer at first. Then he said quietly, "Both." I looked around us, at the trees, at the faint mist hanging in the clearing. Everything felt arranged, placed with intent. The traveler had guided my words earlier that day, but what if he had guided more than that? What if he had guided moments, places, encounters we hadn't lived yet? Mark sat beside me, slowly, as if afraid the ground might shift beneath him. "Do you think he wants us here?" "I think he needs us here," I replied. "For something." We both stared straight ahead, and then, faintly, I felt it, like a soft pressure in the air behind us, the weight of eyes that weren't human or familiar, but steady, intentional, a presence that wasn't intrusive, but calculating. Mark tensed. "David, tell me you feel that." "I do." He swallowed hard. "Is he here?" I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The cold in the air had sharpened into something unmistakable. "He's close," I whispered. And then, somewhere behind us, a stick snapped. Not loud, but enough to break the last illusion that we were alone. Neither of us moved at first. The sound, a small delicate crack of a twig, hung in the air like a fragile warning. It was the kind of noise that could have come from a rabbit or a squirrel, but somehow we both knew better. The forest around us was still, too still, the kind of stillness that comes when something stands just out of view, watching, deciding. Mark gripped the edge of the bench until his knuckles paled. "David, don't turn around fast." I kept my gaze fixed on the trees ahead, the mist curling around the trunks like faint trails of breath. "I'm not turning around at all." "Good," he whispered, "because I feel like if we move too quickly, we'll break something." His choice of words hit me harder than the sound itself. Break something. A moment. A thread. A fragile connection the traveler needed to hold steady. Every thought felt too loud inside my skull. "Is he close?" Mark asked, barely audible. I swallowed. "He's always close." Another twig snapped, quicker this time, closer. Mark tensed beside me. I could feel the fear radiating off him. Not panicked, not wild, just quiet, rooted. The kind that grows when someone realizes the rules of the world have shifted beneath their feet. "Don't look," I murmured. "I'm trying." We sat there, breathing in the cold air, waiting for something to change. And it did. Not loud, not sudden, but subtle, almost gentle. The temperature shifted, dropping a few degrees. The mist thickened around the edges, moving with a faint, intentional pull. And then came the feeling, the unmistakable sensation of being in someone's memory instead of your own. The traveler wasn't approaching. He was arriving. I felt a pressure behind us, not physically touching but shaping the air, like a presence stepping into place, like a missing piece sliding back into a puzzle. Mark's voice shook. I can feel him thinking. I didn't respond. I knew exactly what he meant. The traveler didn't project emotions or words. He projected direction, like he was already guiding the next moment, aligning it with something that had happened or would happen before. Then finally he spoke, not out loud, but inside the moment itself. "You're exactly where you need to be." The words weren't heard. They were felt, settling into the clearing like dust, sinking through the cold air and settling in the spaces behind our ribs. Mark gasped softly, one hand gripping his knee. "You heard that too," he whispered. It wasn't a question. I nodded once. "He's not speaking to us. He's speaking around us." The presence drew closer, measured, calm, and then softly, a shadow fell across the ground to our right. Not dramatic, not elongated, just a shape where no shape should have been, a quiet silhouette of someone standing just beyond the edge of our vision. I felt Mark tremble beside me. "David, if he's here, why won't he show himself?" "Because he wants something from us," I said softly. "And revealing too much might change how we react." A long, unsettling silence followed. Then the traveler's voice, closer now, layered with something faintly tired. moved through the clearing like a whisper slipping between branches. You both made the choices you were meant to make. Mark's breath hitched. What choices? We didn't choose anything. Another pause. A faint shift in the shadow. Every moment is a choice. Even the repeated ones. That word again. Repeated. I felt a pulse of dread inside me. Why are you doing this? I asked the air. What do you need from us? The shadow didn't move. The traveler didn't step out. Instead, his voice softened into something almost regretful. There is a version of your friendship that collapses here. I'm ensuring this isn't that version. Mark stiffened. What does that even mean? I felt a tremor run through me. It means he's been adjusting us. Adjusting moments. Adjusting time. The traveler's presence pulsed in the air. Silent confirmation. Mark turned his head slightly, just enough to see the edge of the shadow. If you want something from us, he said, voice shaking but steady, then tell us what it is. For the first time, the shadow shifted, not stepping forward, simply aligning itself with the angle of the sun as if adjusting the timeline required physical posture. I need you both to stay connected, the traveler said, because what comes next depends on it. A cold wave rolled through me. What comes next? I whispered. But the shadow was already fading, the presence thinning, the temperature rising back to normal as the world reclaimed the space he left behind. Only a final whisper lingered, barely audible. This version matters. And then the clearing was quiet again. Too quiet. Mark covered his face with both hands, breath shaking. David, what version is he talking about? I didn't answer, because the truth was dawning rapidly, in a slow, suffocating realization. We weren't living a moment he needed. We were the moment he needed. And whatever next meant, we were stepping toward it, whether we wanted to or not. For a long moment after the traveler vanished, neither of us spoke. The clearing around us felt drained, like someone had lifted a heavy object from the floor and left behind a faint impression in the air. My breath came slowly, unevenly, and each inhale carried the faint metallic taste of cold fog and fear. Mark's hands were still pressed against his face, shoulders trembling in tiny, uneven motions. When he finally lowered his hands, his eyes glistened, not with tears exactly, but with the quiet shock of someone who had just realized the world is larger and more fragile than he ever imagined. David, he whispered, what if he's been doing this for years? I didn't want to consider it, but the thought had been growing in me since the moment the traveler first appeared. Quiet and patient, like a truth waiting to be acknowledged. Maybe he has, I admitted softly. Or maybe it's only starting now. Mark ran a hand through his hair, exhaling hard. No, I don't think it just started. I think I've felt off for longer than I realized. Moments I can't explain. Things that didn't sit right. His voice wavered. What if those weren't just bad memories? What if he edited something? Edited. The word felt almost violent. I don't know, I said, forcing my voice steady. But we can't assume he's done anything irreversible. We can't assume anything, Mark replied. He wasn't wrong. We left the clearing slowly, walking back toward town in silence. The trees seemed taller than before, their shadows longer, as if we were walking through the leftover outline of a moment that didn't belong entirely to this version of us. Every step felt like stepping across thin ice, aware that something unseen might be shifting just beneath the surface. Halfway down the trail, Mark stopped so suddenly I almost bumped into him. I don't want him in my head, he said quietly, staring at the forest floor. I don't want him deciding who we are. I stepped closer. He's not deciding who we are. He's manipulating circumstances, nudging us. That's deciding, Mark said. If someone controls the moment where things change, they control everything that comes after. I didn't have an argument for that, not a good one. We walked again, slower this time. The path widened eventually, spilling us onto the quiet street that led toward town. The world looked normal, almost painfully so. A mother pushing a stroller, a man fixing the hood of his car, a dog barking at a mail truck, all the ordinary pieces of life moving forward, unaware of the invisible negotiation happening behind the scenes, between timelines, between versions, between us. David, Mark said suddenly, do you think we're the only ones he's doing this to? The question sank deep into my chest. I don't know. What if that woman you saw at the bus stop? What if she's part of this, or stuck in it? She felt different, I said. like she wasn't in danger, like she was observing. Mark shivered. That's worse. I didn't disagree. We turned a corner heading toward my house. The sky was shifting again, those same washed-out clouds drifting overhead, the light catching the edges of them in a way that made the day feel stretched, elongated, familiar, but not quite right. I had another thought, Mark said quietly. What? He hesitated, his voice dropping almost to a whisper. What if we're not supposed to remember him? My breath hitched. He continued, what if the only reason we can feel the seams now is because he's losing control, or because something went wrong? I stopped walking. The world dimmed around us for a heartbeat, tension pooling in the air like thick fog. Mark, I said slowly, what do you mean? Something went wrong. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not fear, not confusion, but realization. He said this version matters, Mark said, like there were others. Versions of us. Versions of this day. Versions of everything. I swallowed hard. And if he's repeating something, Mark whispered, then maybe this isn't the first time we've lived through today. The air tightened around us. The world felt smaller, like the sky had lowered another inch. Mark, I whispered, what are you saying? He exhaled shakily. I think he's fixing something we don't remember breaking. The words lodged deep in me, cold, heavy, true. Before I could respond, Mark took a slow step back, eyes widening, not at me, but at something over my shoulder. David, he breathed, voice trembling. I turned, and the world shifted a fraction of an inch, just enough to know we were no longer alone. When I turned around, I expected emptiness, another quiet patch of street, another moment where the fear was just our imagination. But what I saw wasn't empty, and it wasn't imagined. A figure stood at the far end of the road, not close, not distant, exactly far enough that his features were blurred by the morning haze, but his silhouette was unmistakably human, still, perfectly still, the way only the traveler ever was. No shifting weight, no movement of his arms, not even the faint rise and fall of breathing. He stood like a point in time, anchored to one spot while the rest of the world flowed around him. Mark inhaled sharply. That's him. He didn't say it like a question. He said it like recognition, like something deep in him remembered a shape his mind couldn't fully place. The traveler didn't approach. He didn't gesture. He didn't move at all. But the air around him shimmered slightly, like the thin heat that gathers above asphalt, but colder, tighter, as if time was folding inward around him, pulling the moment taut. What does he want? Mark whispered, eyes fixed on the figure. I didn't answer, because I didn't know if want was even the right word. Needs, corrections, alignments, those felt closer to what he carried. The traveler wasn't seeking desire, he was shaping outcomes. David, Mark said, voice shaking, why can I feel him? I didn't before. I swallowed hard, because whatever he changed before, it's fading, or cracking, or repeating. A quiet tremor ran through Mark. He said this version matters. We don't know what that means yet. Yes, Mark said softly. We do. It means we've been here before. The traveler's silhouette shifted, barely, subtly, tilting his head as if acknowledging the thought. My breath froze in my chest. He wasn't reacting to us. He was reacting to the moment itself, to the pieces falling into place exactly as they were meant to, or as they had before. Mark took a step forward. Don't, I said quickly, grabbing his arm. I have to, he whispered. If we don't ask him, we'll never understand. I tightened my grip. He doesn't give answers. He only gives direction. Mark shook his head. Then maybe the question is the direction. The traveler remained unmoving. The wind shifted down the street, carrying a sharper coldness that slid under my jacket and pressed against my skin. The air felt thick, as if the world was holding its breath. Mark took another step forward, slower this time, like he was testing the ground. Then something strange happened. The shadows changed. Not dramatically, not unnaturally. Just a subtle shift, like the sun had adjusted its position by a few inches, even though the sky remained the same. The traveler's shadow stretched slightly farther across the pavement, pointing directly toward us. David, Mark whispered. He's focusing on us. No, I said softly. He's focusing on you. The shadow lengthened again. Mark froze in place, breathing hard. Why me? I stepped closer to him, lowering my voice. Because something in your timeline cracked. Or he cracked it. And now he needs you to fall back into place. Mark shook his head. I don't want to. I don't want him deciding who I'm supposed to be. You might already be who he needs you to be. Mark's expression twisted. Fear, anger, sorrow, all tangled together. David, he whispered. What if he's not just guiding us? What if he's trying to keep us from making a mistake we haven't made yet? I didn't respond, because the traveler had said something that haunted me more than anything else. This version matters. Versions implied difference. Difference implied danger, and danger implied consequences, ones the traveler might have already lived through. The figure finally moved, not toward us, just a small shift of his hand. A gesture so subtle it could have been mistaken for a trick of the light, but it wasn't. It was intentional. A signal. Mark stiffened. What does that mean? I stared at the gesture, my chest tightening. It means we're about to make a choice. What choice? One that affects everything. The traveler lowered his hand, and then the world didn't freeze, but it tightened, like a thread pulling through fabric. The air seemed to vibrate faintly, the color of the world sharpening at the edges. A pressure built behind my eyes, behind my thoughts, behind the moment itself. Mark grabbed my arm. David, something's happening. I know. The traveler stepped forward once, just once, and time seemed to hold its breath. Mark's voice trembled. What does he want us to do? And I finally understood, with a clarity that felt borrowed, as if it belonged to another version of me. He wants us to say something. Say what? Mark whispered. But the world already knew the answer. The traveler knew. Our next words, whatever they were, would decide which version of us survived the moment. For a heartbeat, everything felt suspended. The traveler's single step forward didn't bring him close, but it altered the air around us. Tightened it, sharpened it, like someone had pulled a string across the moment and we were balanced on it. The world felt fragile, as though one careless word could make the entire version of reality we were living fracture down the middle. Mark swallowed hard, his fingers gripping my sleeve. David, what do we say? His voice wasn't panicked. It was small, quiet, the way someone sounds when they've walked into a room full of memories they don't recognize. The traveler didn't move again, but the way he held stillness felt like an instruction, like he was waiting for the moment to land exactly where he needed it. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to find something steady inside me, but the only thing I could feel was the weight of the morning pressing down, the mark on my gate, the rearranged objects, the voices we had heard without hearing, the fragments of time slipping in and out like breaths. What if this already happened? Mark whispered. What if we're not choosing anything new? I looked at him, and the question felt like it cracked something open inside me. Maybe we weren't choosing. Maybe we were remembering. Maybe this moment was a loop the traveler had nudged us back into, guiding us along until we reached the exact thought, the exact fear, the exact alignment he needed. Mark, I said slowly, what did he say to you in your dream? The one where we were older. What were we talking about? He frowned, trying to recall. I told you it ended before I could hear anything. But you saw me say something. Mark nodded. I don't know what it was. But whatever you said, I felt relieved. Like something heavy had finally stopped pulling at me. I turned back toward the traveler's silhouette, still blurred through the early haze. Maybe that's what he wants us to do, I murmured. Maybe he wants us to say whatever we said in that version. But we don't know what it was, Mark said. We might not need the exact words. Mark stared at me, breathing unevenly. Then what do we say? I looked at him, really looked at him. Not the version of him that was scared or overwritten or drifting between seams, but the version that had sat with me on summer afternoons, racing bikes until the sky turned gold. The version he remembered, even when the memories overlapped. The version the traveler seemed desperate to preserve. The realization settled into me, soft and painful. The traveler wasn't protecting us. He was protecting a connection, an emotional thread between us. Something fragile, something easily broken in the wrong moment. Something that mattered enough for him to repeat this day over and over until the version he needed survived. Mark looked at me waiting, and I knew then that whatever I said had to come from us, not from fear, not from confusion, but from the very thing the traveler was trying to keep intact. So I breathed in slowly, letting the cold settle in my lungs. "Mark," I said quietly, "you're not slipping away from me. Not in any version." His lips parted, eyes widening, not with fear this time, but with something warmer, something fragile and painfully human. "And I'm not letting anything, him, time, whatever this is, rewrite that." The air shifted, subtle, immediate, like the world exhaled for the first time all morning. Mark blinked, tears shining. "David." Behind us, the traveler's shadow softened. The tightness in the air loosened as if a thread had finally aligned with its original path. Mark took a step closer to me, grounding himself. "I thought I was losing pieces of myself," he whispered, "but maybe I was just waiting for this moment to settle." I nodded, though my heart still thudded painfully. We don't know what comes next, but we face it together, not manipulated, not guided, just us. The traveler didn't move forward again. For the first time, his presence didn't press against us. It receded, slowly, quietly, like a tide lowering along the shore. The shadow drew back, dimming into the morning haze. Mark reached out and gripped my hand, steadying himself against the weight of everything we didn't understand. As the traveler's silhouette faded into the gray light, only one truth remained between us. Whatever versions came before, whatever versions might come after, this one held. And in the quiet where he had stood, time finally felt like it belonged to us again. We walked home without speaking, not because there was nothing to say, but because every word felt too heavy to place carelessly into the morning. The traveler was gone, or at least he had stepped back into whatever narrow place he occupied between moments. But his absence didn't feel like relief. It felt like the echo of a door closing softly, leaving us alone with the stillness he used to fill. Mark stayed close beside me. There was a steadiness in the way he moved now, as if something inside him had settled at last, even if the world around us was still rearranging its edges. The tension in his shoulders had loosened, and his breathing had evened out. But his eyes held a quiet question I didn't know how to answer. When we reached my house, we stopped at the gate. The faint scratch on the wooden post was still there. Sharp, deliberate, untouched. A reminder, a marker. A breadcrumb left on the path of a version we no longer fully remembered. Mark traced it with his thumb. "Do you think he's done with us?" I shook my head slowly. "I don't think he's ever really done." He nodded, but not fearfully, thoughtfully. "Then what happens now?" I didn't know. And for the first time I realized I didn't need to. Whatever the traveler had been trying to preserve, whatever version he had repeated and nudged and guided, we had arrived at it. Maybe we had chosen it. Maybe we had simply remembered it. "Now," I said quietly, "we live the day that stays." Mark let out a soft breath, almost a laugh, relieved in a way that hurt to hear. "And if things start slipping again, then we face it together," I said. "Not because he wants it, but because we do." He nodded once, firmly, and as we stood there in the thin gray light of Washington 1987, I felt something I hadn't felt all morning, a moment that belonged entirely to us. No shadows, no versions, no traveler guiding the next words, just now.